Here are 15 things I wish someone had told me before my first street walk, starting with the one that I got most wrong. The first one is going all manual on my first day, and that was a mistake. This one is the one that I got the most wrong because I had read every exposure triangle article I could, so I walked out with the dial on M and I told myself I am a real photographer now. In the moment, with light changing every 10 steps, I couldn't think fast enough to change a single setting, to be honest. And quick context about myself. I'm a product manager at a tech company. Photography is a hobby that I picked up in the early 2010s with a Canon T2i I originally bought to film skateboarding. So theory on the couch is not the same as a dial under your thumb on the sidewalk. So my recommendation is to start with aperture priority. Then and only then graduate to manual. And I say graduate also with quotes, because it really depends what you want to use it for. Second point is that your first photo walks photos are gonna be trash, and that's the point. I can tell you with certainty that every single photo from my first real street walk was bad, and not bad in charming bad, it was actually bad. If I had known that that was the expected outcome, I would have enjoyed the walk a little bit more instead of scrolling the back of the camera between every frame, hoping that something had miraculously worked. The first walk is not a portfolio event, it's actually just like kind of calibration in a way. It's something that will get you to something that you like a little bit more. But if you have a little bit of sense of taste, you probably won't like it. Third point is that saving only JPEGs is a lesson you have to learn, but later. So every file from my first photo walk was a JPEG, and at the time I thought RAW was for professionals, and I wasn't one. And that was true. But what I didn't know is that JPEG is a decision the camera already made for me, and in mixed street light it often decides wrong. So if you care about editing later, then put the camera on RAW and JPEG at least at the same time for now, and your future self will thank you when you try to rescue a window reflection that the JPEG already crushed to black. Let's go to point number 4, which is that you will take too many photos, and that's a trap. I myself took too many photos, way too many photos, and I thought that the volume was a sign of commitment. And to be completely honest, that didn't only happen on my first photo walk, it actually still happens now. It's a sign of uncertainty. So when you don't trust any single frame, you often tend to take 10 photos of the same scene, hoping that one of them will work. Taking fewer photos need to be seen as a skill rather than a restriction. And the next item is the one that I see derail more beginner walks than any technical mistake. So let's go. And that is that the real problem is not necessarily the gear, but the nerves. So most street photographers I've watched, myself included, don't get stuck because of the camera. They, on the other hand, get stuck because lifting a camera towards another human feels like an act of confrontation for the first few times. And in some cases, like me, more than the first few times. So nobody really warns you about the chest tightness. It actually does fade away, but not necessarily through pep talk, so don't take this as that, but actually through repetitions. So walk with the camera already in your hand, already at eye level, and start by capturing benign things, so signs, puddles, shadows, not humans, let's say. By the time that a person walks in your frame, the camera is already part of the walk. You already will be in the mental state to take photos of people, or at least a little bit closer there. And if someone asks what you're doing, then I have another video, and this video is about what happens when you get confronted. So go check it over here, and it's also in the description. Moving on to point number 6 is that editing photos before you know what editing is will hurt you. I edited my first photos without even knowing what any of those sliders did. So I dragged shadows around until things looked interesting and called it a style. It was not necessarily style, of course, it was just me experimenting. So my idea would be to learn what one slider does before touching the next one. Go from exposure to contrast to white balance, and the rest can wait a little because in my case, before I touch the color correction, actually a long time had passed. Number 7 is that nobody cares that you have a camera. Well, almost nobody. And the fear that everyone on the street is watching you is mostly a story that your nervous system is telling you. I know because that's what my nervous system tells me. And the reality is that most people are on their phone. Some people glance and some people will ask, but almost nobody will react the way you're imagining before you leave the house. Point number 8 is the favorite photo from the walk won't be the one that you plan. So you will leave the house with a scene in your head. Golden light on a crosswalk, maybe, or I don't know, a specific place of the city. So you'll spend an hour trying to make that photo, and then when you come back, you will see that the keeper will be something that you got 20 seconds between the planned photos. A reflection, overhead posture, a kid playing with a pigeon, I don't know. anything but the actual thing that you thought was going to be the real picture. So what I would recommend here is to let the planned photo go as soon as the unplanned photo shows up. Point number 9 is light is the subject and the subject is the excuse. So early on, I chased subjects, interesting people, interesting signs, interesting dog, interesting whatever. The photos were sometimes, more often than not, flat because the light was flat. Later, I realized photographers I liked were tracking light first and then waiting for the subject to walk in. So what we can do here is find a patch of good light, stand near it, be patient, and something will happen. And let's move on to number 10, which is walking fast is how you miss everything. My first walk was a march. I covered ground because movement felt like progress, but photos that matter tend to show up when you stop and when you lean into something and when you watch a corner for 5 minutes, for example. So slowing down doesn't mean that you're lazy, but it actually helps the scene to reveal itself. Point number 11 is that the back of the camera lies to you, so watch out for that. So here's the reality. Every photo looks better on a 3-inch screen in the bright sun than it does on your laptop that night. So try not to fall in love with a frame while you're still out there, even though you can get some signals, but don't fall for everything. What I would recommend here is wait for the full-size view before you decide what worked and what didn't. In number 12, we have you don't need a 13mm to be a street photographer. People on the internet will tell you that there is a correct focal length, but in reality that doesn't exist. Use whatever's on your camera. If the only lens you own is a kit zoom, well, that's fine for learning because that will help you play around with it. The focal length debate is something to enjoy later but not necessarily a gate to walk through first. And if you're still on the fence about which camera to pick for this, I made a video about which cameras are better if you are an introverted street photography. Well, have a look over here. On number 13, I have one keeper per walk is a good walk. So if you come home with one photo you actually like, especially when it's out of too many, well, that's a successful walk, a very successful walk, I would say. So if you come home with 3, that's an amazing walk. And 5 is you should consider yourself great, because this is even better. So recalibrate what worth it looks like before you go out there again. And on number 14, I have that you will copy other photographers, and that's fine. Your first year, or maybe first years, your photos will look like whoever you're watching at that moment. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you lack originality, but that's actually how taste gets formed. I've talked about this somewhere on my channel at some point. So feel free to copy and then notice which borrowed ideas stop feeling borrowed, because at some point you will realize that you start getting your own style. And on number 15, I have that the walk is not the hard part, but what happens after is. Nobody's telling you that the real work starts when you sit down with way too many files and try to figure out which ones are actually good. Culling takes practice. So does editing your photos that you thought were great and also admitting that they are not. Going out again the weekend after a bad walk is its own small hurdle. Camera part, honestly, is the easy part. The thing that surprised me the most about starting is that almost none of the hard things were technical. The exposure triangle is not something that made my first walk rough. What made it rough, on the other hand, was expecting that the first walk was to produce something and being unprepared for how much of this hobby actually happens after you put the camera down. The call and the edit take longer than the walk itself, at least for me, and I don't enjoy editing as much as I enjoy taking the pictures themselves. And then there's the quiet decision to go out there again next weekend, even though the weekend before wasn't that good. So if there's one thing I would hand my earlier self, is a reminder to treat the first 100 walks as practice and not performance. If you like the format of this video, I made another one that is a little bit broader, which is 30 things nobody teaches you about photography. So that one's a little bit more general and not necessarily only about street walks. I'll link it here on screen. If this video felt honest, my monthly newsletter Still Shooting goes deeper into what happens after the first walk. So when you have too many photos and no idea which ones to keep. It's one letter a month, link in the description, and also a QR over here. See you. Bye.